The war started because of the calls that Iraq have mass destruction weapons. And following the fall of Saddam regimes, the reason was changed that they are bringing democracy to Iraq, because they couldn't manage to find any of these weapons in Iraq. And I believe that they have the responsibility to do a kind of a correction for the mistake that they have done before, at least to bring back this country again to the internal community and to the regional community again.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're talking of Haider Al-Ithawi. Haider is an Iraqi national worker for UNICEF. Before that, Haider served in different capacities with OCHA, the WFP, and the Iraqi Red Crescent Society as the head of Restoring Family Links and Tracing Program in cooperation with the ICRC. Haider, thank you so much for making the time to join us all the way from Iraq.
Hi, Donald. My pleasure to meet you and have this meeting. So glad to be with you.
So Haider, I'm so tired, like I told you before you started this interview, I'm so tired of the experts, the political analysts, military strategists telling me what to believe the situation is in Iraq. So for history's sake, if we can take a time lapse back before the Americans, the United States invaded Iraq, what was the situation like? What was it like living under Saddam Hussein?
Well, since the 1968, when Ba'ath regime took over the ruling of Iraq government, there was a enormous shift in the way of rolling the country, the management, and in line with a lot of challenges and difficulties within the neighbor countries and internal challenges among different ethnicities and also political parties in Iraq. All of these challenges popped up and reached the peak by the start of Iraq-Iran war at the 80s of the last century. That war lasted 8 years, and tens of thousands of people either were missed or were killed or become disabled due to the consequences of this conflict. And that also hindered the development cycle of the both countries. And following that war, the Iraqi regime found out that they are way behind the development, let's say, strategy within the region. So they decided in a way or another to gain some fund to rebuild the country again by pushing on the countries, especially the Gulf countries, in a way to pay a kind of compensation for the war, and where they consider themselves they were fighting Iran on behalf of all of the regional countries. And that didn't like the whole regime in the countries and developed to the second Gulf War between Iraq and the coalition forces after invading Kuwait. That puts Iraq under sanctions and embargo for several years, and that deeply hit the structure of the education, health services, infrastructure, and even the power of the army was totally weakened by that embargo and sanctions. Although during that time the regime was a kind of dictatorship regime, but within the Middle East, similar to another regime in another countries in the Middle East, it had its own pros and cons. So there was less democracy, less freedom to speak up and to declare your opinions, but at the same time, people were safe as long as you don't be close to the regime itself or to the government system. The rate of wages was very limited. For instance, teachers and military officers, they get $3 to $4 per month. But again, the government has its own what we called public distribution system, PDS, which include 24 food items distributed by the government to all people entitled for that PDS system. So there was no that much issues about fear of lack of livelihood and fear of lack of food and so on. But again, these sanctions were very harmful and impacted a lot of sectors that affect a lot of people and push them to leave the country as refugees to Europe, to the States, or to another places.
Do you generally think sanctions are worth it?
Sorry, come again?
Do you think sanctions are worth it? Do you think it's worth it that the Americans or the rest of the world instituted those sanctions on Iraq? Or do you think sanctions in general are not worth it?
I don't think so, because mainly the main purpose of the sanctions is to undermine the power of the regime and the government, while on the ground it's totally impacted the local population themselves. And following to the statistics of the Ministry of Health and WHO, around 1 million children died because of the lack of nutrition at that era, especially the first 5 to 6 years of the sanctions.
And so I've heard reports of torture that happened during Saddam Hussein's regime. For example, it wasn't uncommon that a family or a family member would all of a sudden be visited and be drawn to a torture chamber. And it's even reports that the rest of the family were forced to clap while this person was being tortured. Is there any truth to this?
Well, there is a lot of reports. Some of them were published on media. Some of them were generally shared through the people by stories shared. And personally, I have heard a lot of stories about torturing within the jails and within some high security governmental entities, in a way that forced people to declare the information that maybe didn't liked from the government side. And as you mentioned, sometimes if the issue related to a family member, that might reflected on the whole family members that might be arrested or disappeared. But yet I personally haven't received a kind of solid evidences on that, because at that time a lot of information were secret.
So there's no proof of this, but do you believe that most likely it happened?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Americans or the Western world through a coalition invaded Iraq, I believe in 2001 to 2003. What was the reception like? Was the average Iraqi citizen glad? I've heard reports that there was a line of Iraqi citizens that clapped and greeted the Americans when they arrived in places like Baghdad. Is that true?
Well, before the American invasion to Iraq, let's say starting from 2001, there was a kind of radio channels being publishing news about Iraq after the conflict, Iraq after 2003, Iraq after Saddam regime, and they keep pumping a lot of information, positive information, that the situation will be changed. We are bringing you the democracy. You will be freely to move, to educate, to speak up, and there will be a lot of media channel, press, newspapers, and so on. So for a lot of people, they were somehow, let's say, eager to do a kind of change within the regime. Although that there was a lot of people on the other hand, either part of the security forces, part of the Ba'ath party and the intelligence systems. But again, there is another category of the population who are the low income categories. They were looking for any chance of change that gives them some hope in the future. But regarding this point, what has been shown on the media, actually there was a lot of exaggeration that people receive the coalition forces by roses and claps because they were very happy of that invasion. You know that I was in Iraq at that time, and during the conflict that lasted almost 22 days, Baghdad mainly was hit by very heavy weapons. We have seen destruction almost all over the city. You can see the nights was totally lightened by these weapons. So a lot of people lost some of their beloved ones or lost their properties because of the conflict. So it doesn't make sense that they welcome people who were, let's say, causing thus destruction.
And what's important here is also the distinction between Sunni and Shia. Can you perhaps explain to our audience why is that important?
Following the invasion, there was not much important about that kind of distinction between both categories, and there was some tries from political parties who came from another countries to feed this kind of let's say crack that might affect the social fabric of the population who lived together for 100 years without any problems, but hasn't affected that much until 2005, when there was a holy shrine. It's considered as a Shia shrine, but in general it's a Muslim shrine, was bombed in Samarra, which is totally Sunni city. So it was considered as an impact against this holy place by a Sunni group. And the day after, I have seen maybe hundreds of people were running on the street, keep destroying either mosques, either public places that considered as a Sunni areas. And that incident sparked the dispute between both sides, and then led to a kind of ethnic conflict, which lasted for more than 2 years.
But just practically, what is the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? Just for our viewers.
It's a kind of historical differences, maybe more than 1,000 a year before, when there was this a kind of a conflict among who is going to take over the Khilafat of the Islamic State at that time, and there was a kind of dispute between the family of Imam Hussein, who is a son of the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and with another, let's say, family in Levant country. So after that, for all of these years, people think that the government system shouldn't be taken in this way. It should be still within the family of the Prophet Muhammad. And then there was a kind of a historical conflict in Iraq, in Karbala city, where all of the family members of Prophet Muhammad either were killed or taken hostages to Levant. People still believe that, and every year they celebrate on this sad occasion. And whenever any kind of Sunni Shia conflict popped up, they remember this tragedy, and that developed to a conflict. And again, as I told you, among the people themselves, there was not that much conflict, but it was fed by political parties for political reasons that helped them to stay in the governmental system and gain more privileges of this type of conflict among a population.
That's interesting. So you're sort of saying that most people don't really care about this. It's really just a proxy war between Saudi Arabia, that's pro-Sunni, and Iran, that's pro-Shia.
Yes, somehow it's linked to that, because I can give you a solid evidence that from both categories, people even have very strong relationships. Among one tribe, you can find members are Sunni and Shia, and they married from each other for 100 years without any issues, and even sons and daughters, they even don't know whether they are Sunni or Shia until that conflict happened. And so it's only a matter of the way that they worship and follow some religious let's say practices.
And so some people say that essentially ISIS is a backlash to pro-Shia forces within Iraq, that ISIS is essentially a Sunni organization funded by Saudi Arabia. Is that true?
Well, if we look into the way that ISIS took over the main cities, all of these cities considered as somehow Sunni cities. And at the beginning, when ISIS took over these cities, they decided either to push some Shia minorities within these cities out of the cities from their ideology. But on the long-term impact, ISIS, what they have done in these cities, it's totally different. The people who were killed mainly from these cities, the destruction that happened, and the fight and the ideas that they share, that impacted the communities, the local communities themselves, let's say the Sunni communities mainly. So later on, people start think that it is not a kind of ethnic war. It's a kind of external agendas. I can give you an example about Mosul city, where they declared the caliphate of ISIL. At the first 2 to 3 weeks, people get a kind of a freedom because ISIS helped them to be away from some security forces who were torturing them and imposing bad behaviors because of the political, let's say, agendas and differences at that time. But later on, when ISIS decided to blow up a holy shrine of Prophet Yohana in Mosul, a lot of people realized that those guys have a totally different agenda that was declared at the beginning.
That's so interesting. So it's all talk and no action. There's no real, they just want to, they're pursuing some strange agenda, perhaps from an external side.
Yeah. And at the beginning, when they say they have different agenda than Al-Qaeda members who took over these areas in 2006 and 2007, day by day, people start to realize that they have maybe worse agendas than those guys. And it's happened by forcing the minorities and like Yazidis and Christians to leave the cities under the name of Caliphate and under the name of ISIL's government. A lot of people have neighbors and friends. They used to live together in peace for a long time. And when they saw such attitudes, that totally changed the opinion of people against those guys.
So you mentioned the Yazidis. I've heard some horrific stories of how they have been treated. What's the story behind the Yazidis? And do you have some stories perhaps of how they've been horribly treated by organizations like ISIS?
Well, from ISIS perspective, they believe that Yazidis are infidels. And according to their agendas, they have the right to abduct their girls, their women, their boys, and even their properties. A lot of Yazidi girls being taken hostages, and after releasing them, they start saying the stories, what they have witnessed during ISIS times. They were tortured, they were raped by those guys, and analyzing the stories that were shared, I think those people, they have a kind of psychological issues. The way that treated innocent people and civilians, it refers to someone has a mental issue. He is not a human being. And even so far, we still receive information that Yazidi girls still being released from ISIS groups, either in Syria or in other countries, back to their areas of origin. The impact, the psychological impact, and the crack that they imposed within, especially within Sinjar, which is a district north west of Nainawa, it will last for a long time. I met a tribal leader and religious leader of Yazidis in Dahuk 2 years ago, and he started telling me stories about the history. And he said that they have, as a Yazidi communities, they witnessed a lot of wars and conflict against them. But for the last one with ISIS, it was the worst one.
Yeah, for example, we've spoken to Tom Holland. He's a historian from the UK, and he is very interested in these issues. He's actively trying to find funds to support the Yazidi groups in Iraq, because he has been to Iraq, and for example, he witnessed a woman who was both raped and shot in the head, and all she could do on a daily basis was just scream, and she experienced it from an ISIS soldier. So it really seems like there are some horrific incidents that happened with Yazidis in Iraq.
Yeah, and the humanitarian ambassador, Nadia, she's a Yazidi lady, and she witnessed all of these horrific incidents. And after she was released, she spoke up and talked to the media, and even she talked within the United Nations at the Security Council building. I think it was in 2018, 2019. And I can tell you there is hundreds and hundreds of stories about this type of craziness that happened and associated with ISIL war.
So I don't know, how do you think this happened? So, for example, I've interviewed recently. I interviewed a person who went through the Rwanda genocide, and I'm just curious. How does one make that switch? I mean, one day this person He's smiling to you. He's laying a brick on a wall, and the next day he's doing these extremely violent. We can't understand how they do this. How do you think this happens? That a person can do these extreme, violent, horrific acts? What does it do? How does this happen to a person?
Well, there is many scenarios. One of them is the random arresting process that started in Iraq after 2005, either by the American forces and also by the Iraqi security forces, where they used to arrest people even because of the fake news that he might be a terrorist member, and keeping those people for several years under torturing and under bad treatment, lack of food and family connections, that create a huge pressure on those people, even on their personality. When they were released, they decided to revenge for what they have seen in the detention period. I met one guy when I was with the IRCS at that time. He was released after 4 years of being arrested under the coalition forces in Buka prison. It's the very famous prison place in south of Basra, between Kuwait and Basra. And he told me that I was arrested when I was 15 and he was released when he was 19. And he raised a very solid question. He said, if I am innocent, why I've been arrested for and kept for 4 years? And if I am murder or a terrorist member, why I was released? So it doesn't make any sense. And he was telling me about a lot of stories inside the detention centers. He said, we were receiving very recent published books that feeding the sectarian violence, that's feeding the terrorism and the radicalism, either of Islam or another agendas. So people, when they were released, they were a kind of well-trained to do the actions that they were received in the detention centers. And after that, a lot of military officers who were dismissed by primary decision to dismiss all of the Iraqi, former Iraqi army and security forces, they found out themselves in the street without any salaries, without any benefits that they used to have before. And they were very easy to be attracted by those groups' members.
Do you think ISIS would have happened if the Americans did not dismiss the entire Iraqi army?
I believe so.
It would not have happened. There would not have been an ISIS.
No, because the way that the Iraqi army who left their positions, let's say in Mosul, it happened within few hours. A lot of military forces and troops withdraw in front of 40 vehicles. And if we look to the way that those people being supported and developed from 2003 till 2013, there is a huge fund being spent on the military support and equipment and training by the coalition forces toward new Iraqi security forces. It shouldn't be defeated in this way.
Mm. And I mean, obviously,
and again, the way that government left these areas for 3 years, it shouldn't be like this. There should be an emergency plan to retaking these areas before those people took over all of these areas, took their positions and create their own, what the so-called a new state. Because within 3 years, a lot of people get a kind of brainwash. One of my friends who used to live in the ISIS-controlled areas, he told me that ISIS members put a huge screens in the streets and keep showing people how they torch people, how they torch the security forces if they didn't follow their instructions. On the other hand, they informed the population that if the Iraqi army took over your areas, you will be torched and you will be arrested by these forces in this way. So they keep trying to play on very sensitive topics.
And I mean, obviously, the army of Saddam Hussein was obviously very big. There was a lot of people that were laid off. So I mean, that created a sort of a unemployment vacuum that had to be filled by someone.
Yeah, and as I told you, when those people were dismissed, the only let's say job that they know is to be an army member, and they found themselves jobless. They have their own families, they have their own daily requirements and needs to be covered. So that's why they were, or maybe let's say some of them were easily attracted by those groups. And you gave an example, and I have seen that in areas in Kirkuk, where people keep saying that we used to live with a carpenter, with a farmer, and with the tire maintenance people. And the next day, when ISIS took over, they declared themselves like prince of a group. So it was a kind of big shock for those people, when those people being connected, trained, communicated, and easily controlled all of these areas. There is a kind of network being hidden and working for several years before taking this action.
I don't know if you know who Majid Narwaz is. He's a member of parliament in the UK. He's a former radical Islamic extremist, terrorist, whatever you want to call it. And he also would agree with you that these things happen at a young age, especially when the people arrive in prison. That's when they're they're guilty before they even know it. And that's when these indoctrination happens. And that's what happened to him. So he would agree with you. The indoctrination happens at a very young age.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a lot of examples on the same issue. As I told you, when people were arrested, especially the young ages, they were tortured in a very bad way. And the first impression that they have when they are released is to revenge to themselves. And I remember in the media, there was someone who was totally innocent young man, and he was arrested for more than 5 years. He was tortured in very bad manner, and when he was released, he decided to have his own plan to take the officer who was in charge on torturing him, by sharing information with him that there is a terrorism group in a certain location, which was very attracting objective for him to arrest those groups. When he reached that location, I mean the officer, he found himself in a big trap, and he was killed with all of the unit that was joining him at that duty. So you can imagine the changing of the mentality from a young person, very innocent, have no any idea about the radically agendas, into a kind of leader who is deciding such tactical attacks.
That's so fascinating, because I see a lot of correlations between that and the situation here in the Western Cape of South Africa with gangsterism, where young people in prison, where they find themselves in a gang and they can't get out of it because they've been like forced into this gang at a young age. But either is it true that Saddam Hussein, when he took over, that he summoned the entire parliament before him, and he handpicked people who had apparently conspired against them. And these individuals were put into a separate room, and the rest of the parliamentarians had to execute them.
It's not the parliament members, but they were the Ba'ath party members who were against his policies from the beginning. And there is a kind of trial, which was a kind of fake trial, that you are against the main principle of Ba'ath party. So you are a kind of traitors. So that's why he executed those people, because he believed that those people might hinder the way that he is going to run the country in the future. And that was published either by videos and reports in many media sources.
But I mean, what was different from this, from other events that dictators would like to do, is he put the guns into the hands of the party members and he made them execute those members. He didn't call in his own executioners. He made the other party members execute them. So they were culpable in the crime that he committed.
Yeah, because at that time, it was a kind of either forcing those people or encouraging them to do so, because they believe that their colleagues are a kind of a nation enemies and they should be killed. And at that time, you know, Iraq and Iran, they were a kind of ongoing clashes between the both countries, and it was a kind of strong justification to find a way to convince killing those people. They were considered against the principle of the revolution and Ba'ath party.
So Haider, you've lived in a very interesting country that has seen quite a few conflicts. When do you feel that you were the most unsafe? During Saddam Hussein's period, during the American occupation, or now? When did you feel like it was the most unsafe to live in Iraq, that you feared for your life the most?
That's a very good question. For me, as an Iraqi person, I feel that twice. One of them in 2006 till the mid of 2007, during the peak of sectarian violence. When you leave your home, you don't know whether you are going back or not. And there was a lot of violence on the street every day. There was a lot of unknown corpse left on the streets and then being taken by either municipality or by police officer and buried in unknown graveyards and without informing their families. That was a very, let's say, difficult moment for me to think about it. And the other one, when the conflict started between ISIS and the federal government and the Iraqi security forces, and that required to create a kind of military groups to fight ISIS. A lot of these military groups, some of them were even were not official under the umbrella of the security forces. And it was difficult to distinguish between who is exactly the official troops that following the security system and who are the fake one. So those two eras for me were very unsafe period in my life.
Fascinating. And did you ever have to deal with a terrorist? Did you ever come in contact with a terrorist that you had to have a conversation with him?
It was in 2007 when my cousin was abducted, and that terrorist picked his phone and called me, and he said, I want a speed answer. Is that person Sunni or Shia? And at that time, I don't know which group that he's belonged to. And if I give a wrong answer, my cousin might be killed. So I start to talking to him and changing the subject and taking some time to get any idea that those people, who are they belong to, or the place that my cousin were taking. And when I start hearing the sirens, I realized that this one is under the militia. He's not under the Al-Qaeda. So that's the way I was dealing with him. And after a very long negotiation, my cousin was released safe.
Wow. And did this militia unit, did he want a ransom for your cousin?
No, at that time, there was no any request for ransoms. There was the killing because of your identity. If you are Sunni and you are entered to a Shia-controlled area, that might be an end point, and vice versa.
Wow. And okay, so do you feel, what's the current situation like in Iraq at this moment? Do you think things are stabilizing?
Due to the constitution that was developed in 2005, that let's say categorized people based on their ethnicities, their nationalities, their let's say political parties, and even the governmental positions being divided accordingly. And after that, each government, when it was selected based on this categorization, it's not because of the people who let's say scored number of parliament seats and so on. And that issue reflected on all governments so far. We had a recent, let's say, election in October last year, and so far we don't have elected a government accordingly because of the dispute among the governmental positions between the political parties. So regardless to the other challenges that the country are facing, some of them security challenges in the south nowadays because of the security vacuum, the climate change impact that start hitting the country heavily since last year. We have a dust storm every year. The lack of electricity because we couldn't manage to develop a new power system, but import electricity and gas from Iran. So they control the way of supplying the power to Iraq. The lack of health system, and it was totally reached the peak by COVID-19 pandemic. All of these challenges put aside, and the political parties still think how can they get more political seats among the government, among the ministries. And if you follow the media, there is a lot of attacks either from Turkey side, from Iran side, to the Iraqi territories under the umbrella of fighting the terrorist groups and either the PKK, the party, the Kurdish Turkish parties against the Turkish government, and the fighters against the Iraqi regime, the Iranian regime, who are based in some areas in Iraq. And again, the government is kept their hand without doing anything against that.
Haider, how does the dust storm, what is the significance of how it impacts Iraq negatively? Is there crops in Iraq that the dust storm unsettles?
The major part of the western areas of Iraq is a desert area. And there was a strategic plan to build a kind of green belt surrounding all cities to prevent these dust storms. By 2003, a lot of these strategic projects being looted. The pump stations, the power system, and the networks. So that's affect all of these projects. On the other hand, a lot of farmers decided to withdraw farming because of the lack of financial resources and also the lack of support that used to receive from the government before 2003. That create a huge areas turned to a kind of desert. And when we are looking to the number of dust storms at the 19s, is way different that we face nowadays. In addition to that, there was a kind of dispute among the ration of water coming from upstream from Turkey and from Iran toward Iraq, because they are creating new dams in their countries. That affect the water levels in Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and also impacted negatively the weather in Iraq.
Interesting. Haider, do you think, okay, with the Turkish involvement in Iraq and with Iran's involvement in Iraq, that there's sort of an argument to be made that Iraq should be split into smaller countries? I mean, wasn't Iraq a creation by the British?
So for the time being, there is very small, let's say, trials that pushing toward that side. But 10 years ago, there was a lot of, let's say, plans and supporters toward the separation of the country into 3 minor countries because of the sectarian violence, because of the political agendas and the involvement of the regional countries inside Iraq. For the time being, I don't think so. I can see that the general norm of the population are supporting the united country.
But I mean, if you wouldn't that solve the issue of foreign influence, or do you think even if the country was split into smaller groups, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey would still be somehow involved in everything?
I don't think so. That might worsen the case, but I believe what will sort out the external influence is to have a strong government.
Are you optimistic about the future of Iraq?
According to the indicators that I have seen nowadays, I'm not optimistic in the nearest future. It might take, let's say, decades to sort out the problem, especially the consequences of 2003 turnover.
And those indicators are?
Sorry?
Those indicators are?
So there is a huge, let's say, involvement from regional powers and countries inside Iraq. There is a kind of influence of political ideas and ideologies among the top leaders down level to the governmental, let's say, staff that we have. The corruption that has happened following 2003, all of that impacted the future, let's say, development plan and stability. I can say that the Iraqi government declared the defeat of ISIS in 2017, and we are now in 2022, while there is a lot of Iraqi still living in the displacement areas on internally displacement camps, are not able to return back to their areas after 5 years of taking these areas. That means there is a huge gap required to be filled, either on security level or on the infrastructure and livelihood level.
Well, Haider, this has been such an interesting conversation. I think our viewers and I have learned so much about the situation. I want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to give you one last opportunity if you want to add something or answer a question that you hoped I would ask you.
Well, my pleasure to talk to you. It was very nice to have this conversation with you. And I really like your consideration to the situation in Iraq, which is somehow due to the different conflict in the world. It's out of the, let's say, the limelights of the media nowadays. So one of the question that I was thinking that you might ask, if let's say the American government might has own plan to rehabilitate or to do a kind of a goodwill following to the 2003 war. The war started because of the calls that Iraq have mass destruction weapons. And following the fall of Saddam regimes, the reason was changed that they are bringing democracy to Iraq, because they couldn't manage to find any of these weapons in Iraq. And I believe that they have the responsibility to do a kind of a correction for the mistake that they have done before, at least to bring back this country again to the internal community and to the regional community again.
Absolutely. It seems like I just invaded and just left without any proper plan for what comes after.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Haider, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. To our viewers, you enjoy this content as well, so please show your appreciation by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this video as widely as possible. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.